Welcome back to Plus One. I am your host, Chris Heatherly, and I'm here with Erich Schwartzel. Erich, how's it going?
Hey, how's it going? Good to be here.
Thank you for doing this. So, Erich is a reporter at the Wall Street Journal. He also wrote a book that we're going to get into called Red Carpet, Hollywood, China, and the Global Battle for Cultural Supremacy. And he has a new book, which I hope he'll be willing to talk about, called Empire, about Star Wars and the drama of the last few years with Star Wars. So welcome to the pod.
Hey, it's great to be here. I know we have a lot of ground to cover.
Yeah, we could do like 7 of these. So I tried to write down just all the crazy stuff happening in Hollywood. Skydance just closed their deal with Paramount and announced their new management team. Warner Discovery is going back to Warner and Discovery. Comcast is spinning off its cable assets. Disney has a new CEO next year, just announced a big NFL network deal for ESPN today. And that's, I mean, not even the half of it. You cover the Hollywood entertainment beat. Obviously there's a lot of very kind of obvious stuff. Streaming, theaters are still struggling, lots of change in Hollywood. But what's the buried lead in your mind? What are people not paying attention to that they should be?
Well, I think actually, if we had been talking at any point, starting about 10 years ago, I would have said China and that China was this sort of sleeping giant. But I think that might be the answer today, but just for entirely different reasons, which is I spent several years cataloging how China had grown to become this massive force and power in Hollywood boardrooms. Studios couldn't access the market without pleasing Chinese Communist Party censors, and so every movie made by a major studio, large or small, kind of had to fit into these kind of boxes that wouldn't offend China. And it was one of the things that really accelerated the rise of like the franchise movie and these kind of global tentpole strategy. I think China's the answer today, though, for a very different reason, which is that it is no longer providing really any economic value to Hollywood. Its box office has not recovered since COVID, much as the US's hasn't. But in the way that it's recovered has been very interesting, where audiences in China are not going to see American films to the degree they were. And now you're lucky to get a couple $1,000,000 on an American movie in China. I don't think that necessarily means it's like a new day for free expression in Hollywood. I think there's still going to be concerns for all these other reasons, including like theme parks and supply chains and so on. But that cushion of Chinese revenue has basically disappeared overnight. And at the same time, audiences in the US and around the world are getting a lot more receptive to foreign content, or what we would consider foreign content. And so I think two things are happening. One is the found money that China represented for more than a decade has disappeared. And at the same time, China has really taken the Hollywood playbook and in places around the world used it to its advantage and used it in its kind of like soft power to couple with the other sort of harder power, like the deals and the investments that we're seeing elsewhere. So I would say China is still the sleeping giant because it's such a massive force and it's really now sort of concentrating its power in a different direction.
So let's break down a couple things you just said. One was the rise of the global blockbuster, and in particular, the Marvel phenomenon, probably even more than the Star Wars phenomenon. But movies like that, Jurassic World, has also done, huge box office. There, lots of franchise films like that. China accelerated those. Why? Through its funding and access to its market. Is that why?
Well, those movies they travel very well.
Right.
If we could go back in time, let's say to 2016, we'd be looking at a world where those movies travel very well. They're not like comedies or romantic dramas that have sort of like more like cultural idiosyncrasies to them. They cost a lot of money, so they need to make a lot of money, which means that you really, at that point, were greenlighting these films on the expectation that they would be allowed into the Chinese market. And they also, at that time, were still a novelty to most Chinese consumers. It's hard to even imagine now because all we know of China is like modernity and massive new cities built overnight. But for many, many years, they were a drastically underscreened country. They didn't have a lot of movie theaters. and they didn't really have access to a lot of foreign films. And so something that was this big sort of special effects spectacular, the kind that we now get like 8 to 12 of a year, was really this kind of novel, held this kind of novel appeal. And then obviously, like as you would expect, that appeal has tapered off. So
Mhm.
several things have happened at the same time, but that was the main, I think, accelerant for why Hollywood felt as comfortable as it did putting so many chips on these $300 million productions.
Yeah.
I'll just
Yeah.
give you like one sort of before and after. So like when back in like the heyday of the Chinese box office, at a green light meeting, I was told you always have to give comps on what you might expect, like projected box office for the film that you're getting ready to put into production. And there would be a column for US Canada, there'd be a column for international, and there'd be a column for China. Like
Mhm.
China represented its own column. And today, if there is a China column, they put a zero
Yeah.
in that column
Yeah.
because the predictability is so hard to know in terms of whether you'll get in, and then once you are in, it's going to be pennies compared to what it used to be.
Yeah, I was on the inside in those days. And I remember that sitting in some of those meetings where the head of the studio would be like, so how are we doing with the censors? How are we feeling about, because you never knew whether the movie was really going to get into China until they saw the final cut.
Hmm.
But there was like a long like process, and I don't know all the ins and outs of it, but of how they sort of introduce and lobby to get these things into the market. And so they have a feeling about whether they're going to get distribution, based on certain factors. And sometimes there are things about the movies that, but for example, if it has, heavy supernatural themes, the CCP doesn't like that, right? There's certain things that like sometimes the studios wouldn't think of that would run afoul of the censors and keep it out, and then it would be it would be a huge hit to forecasts. Why do you think the capital inflows, the co-investment deals with China dried up? I mean, there's sort of been this rising animosity between the sort of a new Cold War between the U.S. and China. There's been the TikTok thing, but the U.S. hasn't put limitations on capital inflows from China necessarily. Is this Xi wanted to pull back on those deals, or sort of how did all that happen?
It was definitely the pullback originated from Beijing. So there was a time where you're right, like it felt like almost like Los Angeles looked like everyone had one publisher's clearinghouse.
Yeah,
Everyone was standing with these kind of random Chinese business partners holding giant checks. I mean, I'll never forget going to an event at LACMA across the street from my office where Eric Garcetti announced a big deal with Wanda, which was building these studios in Northeast China, and they announced an LA to Qingdao direct flight, and of course, I mean, even at the time, there was criticism like, why is Los Angeles's mayor praising someone who's taking a bunch of jobs from Los Angeles and putting them in China? But those deals dried up almost overnight because Xi Jinping basically started to suspect that there were two things behind these deals. One was it was a way to get money out of China
right.
and sort of just find better investments in a stronger currency. And two, that for all the talk that these business leaders had of how these investments were actually sort of all they were rowing in the same direction as the CCP because it was going to sort of put a Chinese foothold in the American culture industry and so on. He started to really suspect that that was all just hot air designed to try to get these deals through. And I'd have to be fact checked on this, but I really do think the only one that ended up actually happening was Wanda with AMC theaters and Wanda with Legendary, and those have both been wound down. I'm pretty sure,
Yeah.
and then when Xi's directive from Beijing came, there was just this like evaporation of all these deals, and there were so many broken hearts throughout the city. I remember my favorite example was there was this Chinese metals company that was going to buy Voltage Pictures, which is a production company that was at the time I think best known for like putting some money in the Hurt Locker. And this was like a Chinese firm that operated like zinc factories, and they were going to bring Voltage Pictures into the fold. And they were like in negotiations. They were like closing the deal when this directive from Beijing came, and everyone at Voltage realized like this is not happening. This sort of like exit that fell from the sky is just gone. And so now I think there's a lot of skepticism. And what's really interesting is I see now a sequel taking shape with Money from the Middle East.
Hmm.
And Money from the Middle East now, and this is not just Hollywood, this is across entertainment, like sports and live events and comedy and that kind of thing. I talk to a lot of people who are being approached in ways that remind me a lot of the early China days. Only it's various Middle Eastern countries. Because one thing that I've also I'd failed to appreciate is how much the countries in that region are in competition with each other. And so Saudi gets something and UAE wants something. And so there's all this sort of like jockeying. But I feel like something similar is happening there.
Yeah, Disney did a deal for the parks with it's in Qatar, right?
Well,
Or is it
it's in
UAE?
the park is going to be in
Abu
Abu
Dhabi.
Dhabi.
That's right. Abu
Yes.
Dhabi. That's right. That's right. Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of Middle Eastern, and the same thing in games, which is very close to film. We had in the games industry, by the way, we had the Chinese chicken company, which was they ran like egg farms and
Okay.
processing, and some guy who was former, I think it was NetEase, took over this chicken company and turned it into a game publisher. And so he was divesting of their chicken assets while he was buying game studios over in the West. They bought Telltale, I think, at one point. Um,
How did it work for him?
I mean, it wound up dying because it's a similar type of thing. The CCP cracked down on a lot of those, foreign investments. I think they wanted to, China is the biggest games industry, the biggest games market in the world. So I think she was sort of like, why are you financing all these Western game studios when should just be putting that capital into Chinese developers? And by the way, I mean, they have a too good a deal because they have full access to our market where unlike films where their films are very have can do huge but are regional,
Yeah.
regional
Don't
appeal.
travel.
Their games have global appeal, right? So Black Myth Wukong was a
Oh,
big,
right.
big game last year. But in mobile, they probably have, I think it's like a third of the top 10 or 20 games in the App Store. So they have full access to our market with titles they produce, but we can't publish there directly. And that asymmetry has survived, all of the, tariff negotiations and everything else. So there's really no reason for them to invest abroad anymore because their domestic games production industry has so much to gain.
Now, are there the soft power concerns with the games that we've seen with things like movies and TikTok?
Not at the same level. It's really data concerns, I think, more.
Yeah.
Are these things being used as spyware? I've told this story before, but when I was in Universal, we were negotiating with one of the biggest studios in China that was owned by Tencent for a Fast and Furious game. And I could not get them to agree to any privacy. At first, I tried to get them to agree to domicile the data in the United States and, not repatriate it into China. They wouldn't agree to that. So then we said, then we'll just put in language that says you just have to follow US law, whatever that is. And that's standard for any license agreement, by the way. It says if there's a law, you have to follow it, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But they wouldn't agree to that. And I was like, okay, well, if we can't agree that you're going to follow any laws, then I don't know. And I left.
What was their explanation? What was their explanation?
Their explanation was they're the biggest game company in the world, and this is one of the biggest studios in the world, and we're going to put 1,000 people on your game, and there's no other place that can do that, and we're going to spend unlimited amounts of money on marketing, and basically, this is the deal. That's their explanation. We're just not going to sign that. We have the leverage.
Did the deal go through?
Nope. For that very reason.
Yeah, fascinating.
However, this year, the number one film at the box office is a Chinese film.
Neja 2. Yep. Exactly. Yeah. And it's made, I mean, I think it's over $2 billion now. I mean, how many movies in history have grossed 2 billion? A
Yeah.
handful, right?
Yeah, it's
Only a
1.8.
few. But it's like I think it's probably at this point like 97, 98% all in China. To your point, like does not these films do not travel. Although I do think if China has a sort of global cultural breakout, I think it will probably have to come from animation, at least initially. I think animation will probably be its best shot. But everything that Korea is doing right now is desperately what China wants. I mean, with Parasite and Squid Game, K-pop. I mean, all of those sort of cultural exports are what China is aspiring to. I mean, it goes without saying, though, very, very hard to make any movie about class warfare or anything like remotely as provocative as Parasite or Squid Game in the Chinese system. So that will always sort of be what they butt up against. But if you go to other parts of the world, like particularly in Africa and other parts where there's been this massive Chinese investment, there's much more reciprocity. And the systems that are in place like only fuel that. Like across Africa, you can buy really cheap Chinese satellite dishes that carry a bunch of channels, but they also carry Chinese movies
Interesting.
and TV shows and soap operas. That's all obviously even ignoring like what can happen on mobile to your point and what can be watched on mobile. So, but I think Neza 2, what's interesting is I'm interested to see how this goes. A24 of all studios is releasing it in the US with an
Mm.
English dubbing. I don't know why they're doing it, and I don't quite know what to expect because I do think that movie, certainly if you were aware of it, you've seen it because they did release the Chinese version with subtitles in particularly in like here it was out in like San Gabriel Valley, like in like sort of
Hmm.
Chinese immigrant communities. So I don't know necessarily what the A24 move is there. If it might be just that this was such a massive hit that there might be some sort of tailwind appeal.
Yeah.
But that's the first time I've seen something like that happen.
Well, I have to imagine also that they pick a good window, they get favorable terms with the theaters, like it's a low risk bet for them, right? Because the movie's already
Yep.
made, so
Yeah,
it's
that's a
just a
good point.
distribution deal. They just have to hurdle their marketing cost. I mean, there's a lot of anticipation for this new anime that's coming out soon, which is the finale of that series. And I think, and those movies have done some box office. I was just looking at a list of box office in prep for this call, and I mean, the numbers that that movie has done in Japan alone have been like huge. So there's definitely this factor of foreign content used to never work in the United States, and now it really is, especially anime and Korean stuff. Why do you think the Korean stuff has taken off so much in the last, it's been kind of half a decade, but really intense since COVID, right?
I wish I knew. I mean, actually, there's a great story to be done on how sort of one after the other there have just been these successive hits. And I mean, Parasite was just named the best movie of the century so far, right? By the New York Times. That New York Times list listed it. It's a great point. I mean, I was actually just having a conversation about this with someone who was positing that Korean entertainment has like really kind of explored like I mean, I don't want to jump to Star Wars, but it's really explored the dark side in a way
Mhm.
that has like really, really taken off, and in a way that is like with Parasite and Squid Game in particular, like no one would call that safe and sanitized. And
No.
I'm thinking out loud here. I don't I haven't like bulletproof this idea, but it does seem as though we are in a moment where like entertainment is very safe, predictable. It can feel like I think TV in particular, right? There's been this conversation around how mid so much of TV is these days, where it's just fine. It's kind of exactly what you're gonna get. My partner and I happened to scroll through the top 10 on Netflix last night to see what was there, and it was so fascinating how the TV selection slotted into such sort of neat categories, right? Like it kind of seemed like you knew exactly what you were signing up for. And the Korean entertainment, and look, we've only mentioned two or three examples here. Like that is you would not describe it as such. Like if anything defines those two, that show and that movie, it's unpredictability.
Yeah, they have the benefit of their own market, right? Where things can break out and then they can sell that to a Netflix or whatever and say, like, this is the huge hit, right? Get behind this. Where in part of the problem is the way that these shows are bought and brought to market now. It doesn't seem like it gives as much opportunity for something independent to truly break out, right? Because
Hmm.
it's all driven from the streamer down as opposed to the market coming up with something interesting and then somebody buying it as much, especially now that, budgets have been cut and all these other things. Like, people are looking to secure funding commitments before they do anything, right? They're not making shows on the
Would you
come.
put Baby Reindeer in that category? Would you put something like Baby Reindeer in that category?
I don't,
Like,
I don't,
wasn't that something a bit of a sui generis discovery?
yeah,
Or maybe it wasn't. Maybe
I think it is. I think a lot of these shows that come from the outside of the US market, right? Come from outside of Hollywood, have that opportunity because they've got some local market that they can gain some traction in, and then when they come to the streamer or whoever, there's more buzz around them and they get more push because they get more featuring, they get all that other stuff versus just getting dropped on the service and then hope somebody finds it.
right, right. And if you're highlighted by Netflix, it's like getting on the first page of Google, right? It's
Yeah. Yeah,
you're off. Yeah.
exactly. Exactly. I mean, that's why I think Squid Game obviously is a brilliant show, right? We all love it, but it came out during COVID when there was like nothing. I mean, it couldn't have come out at a better time, right? There was like nothing going on.
Right.
And that showed you
It's funny,
how.
totally, totally. You said something that I've been turning over a lot, which is, as you mentioned, I've been reporting this book on Star Wars, and I read this piece that ran right around the time of the Star Wars re-releases, 97, and it was called "It's the When," and it was this really smart piece about how if you look at any cultural breakout, the number one factor in it breaking out is always timing, more than quality, any other kind of element you can point to. The piece is called "It's the When," because it argues that, like, basically everything that we've looked at that sort of reached the stratosphere of cultural penetration has the timing more than anything else to thank for that.
Yeah, I mean, we're definitely in a period right now, I think, where, to your point, everything's very safe because Hollywood has just been bruised, so they don't want to take any risks. And the culture war, I think, also has chewed everything to death, right? Like, every major franchise has been caught up in it, and there's, bad feelings, on both sides of it. And it's driven a lot of risk aversion from in these major franchises as well. So they've gotten more bland. And it really feels like we're kind of in that moment, like the right before Robert Evans and Paramount took off in the 70s, or, you know, Tarantino came around and the indie revolution in the 90s, where nothing's working. The executives seem to have no clue what the audience wants. Hollywood has gone through this, a couple times in its history. I mean, it went through this after kind of talking pictures, I think, as well. There was a period where a period of adjustment where they just didn't, where they just couldn't quite figure it out. So it's the industry's gone through this before, but it's kind of waiting for that next big thing to kind of, it could be, and it's not necessarily going to be franchise fare, right? It could be like when Judd Apatow's comedies were like rated R comedies were making all this money and no one would have ever thought. There are all kinds of,
Mhm.
the culture can take different directions. Well, since you've referenced Star Wars a couple times, I'd love to kind of talk about the book. So, other than the obvious, what do you think the state of Star Wars is, and what do you think their path back is?
That's a great question. I mean, I'll try to answer this as intelligently as possible. You have the risk here of talking to me while I'm in the middle, sort of drowning in material. I mean, I've been telling everyone, like, I understand now why every book about Star Wars is 700 pages long, because there is just so much to cover. When I think about, like, sort of the current state of Star Wars, I think back to a moment at Celebration, which is it's kind of like the Comic-Con for Star Wars that Lucasfilm holds. And I went to the one that they had last year in London. And I attended this panel that was on the original line of Kenner toys. The Kenner toys were the toys that were released right after the movie came out in 1977. These small little plastic dolls from a company in Ohio. So this was a panel where they had people from Kenner there. So they had these old dudes up there talking about designing little Luke and little Leia, and everyone in that room had received those toys as mostly little boys in 1977. So this is like the older crew at the convention. And right next door, they were having a panel on the new Ahsoka show. that Disney Plus was premiering with Rosario Dawson and a bunch of other stars from that show. And the Kenner Toys panel, the panelists had to keep repeating themselves because the noise from the Ahsoka panel would drown out their answers. Like it was like impossible to hear them because the Ahsoka panel was so loud. And I thought this right here is basically the challenge that Lucasfilm has in a nutshell, right? Because both sides of this divider are Star Wars fans, and yet they were introduced to Star Wars as a very different thing than the other side, and some might expect it to stay that thing, some might not expect it to stay that thing, but there really is now, I think, in a way that no other franchise really has, but with the maybe exception of Harry Potter, like has like a billion different constituents to try and please at the same
Right.
time. And so in a way, the streaming era of making a lot of different kind of stuff is actually, I think, probably what you almost have to do rather than try to find the kind of big, like occasional big tent, everyone's on board for this one thing type product, because it's the franchise is now too old and has brought people in from so many different entry points that think of someone to think of one kind of Star Wars fan is just missing the full picture.
That's interesting. Yeah. And I think that, I mean, you see that in the new trilogy especially, but also some of the TV shows where they want to tell new stories, but then they also want to bring back all these nostalgic elements and characters. But then when they touch those stories and those characters, the people from my generation go, what the hell are you doing? So Luke wouldn't do that, or that contradicts this, or whatever. And so it's kind of a damned if you do, damned if you don't. Not that I want to defend, some of the choices that Lucas has made, but in fairness to them, like, it's like people when with the Mandalorian, I think it was season 2, when it ended with Luke Skywalker,
Coming back, yeah.
with the deep fake, people went bananas, right? And they loved it. And then, fast forward a couple years and they bring back Vader on Obi-Wan Kenobi, and people on the Obi-Wan Kenobi show, and people had all kinds of problems with it. So it's very interesting how fan sentiment changed so dramatically between really the Mandalorian and then, some of the new television stuff. It's funny that I saw an article yesterday that clearly had a lot of sources inside Disney, but, was sort of laying the blame of all Disney's Marvel problems at the feet of Disney Plus. And I feel
Hmm.
like, it's like, yeah, Disney Plus is part of it, but it feels a little too easy to me because Disney, I mean, they got huge budgets, right, to make that stuff. I mean, yes, they were asked to make too much content, but they got huge budgets. No one told them what to write, and just some of the creative choices were terrible. I mean, what's been going on inside of Lucas during this time period, sort of post the new sequels and some of the TV content that we've been seeing?
Well, remember, The Mandalorian really was credited with helping launch Disney Plus
Yeah,
as successfully as it did.
it was a huge success and everyone loved it.
Huge, and Baby Yoda, Grogu, like
Cultural phenomenon.
cultural phenomenon at like just the right time. I remember the first day Disney Plus launched and they announced that they had 10 million signups and the stock shot up. I mean, in a way, that did as much as anything of justifying the Lucasfilm acquisition, right?
Mm-hmm.
And what it helped with there. I mean, I think we're about to see, though, a lot of different verdicts come in, because next year they've got the Mandalorian movie, which will be the first Star Wars movie in 7 years. Remember,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's kind of crazy to think about this now, but starting in 2015, there was a new Star Wars movie every year until 2019, and it was a cadence that a lot of people inside and outside Lucasfilm did not think was sustainable. But that the plan was sequel trilogy, spin-off, sequel trilogy, spin-off, sequel trilogy, and to keep going. And then, in fact, I remember being at the premiere of Solo and there being this almost like sense of deja vu, because it was like it had been like 6 months since we were there for The Last Jedi, I think.
Mm-hmm.
And so there was this cadence, and as I said, there's now will be have been 7 years. We've got the Mandalorian movie next year, and then in 2027 is the 50-year anniversary. So they've announced that they're going to re-release A New Hope for the 50th anniversary, and then they've got the Ryan Gosling movie that's shooting now. So if you're of the camp that believes, and there is a camp that believes that like the number one thing that Star Wars must be judged on is its movies, its big screen releases.
Mm-hmm.
We've got like two big verdicts coming in there.
Mm-hmm.
And then TV wise, that has been, as it has been with Marvel, like much more of a buffet. I mean, it's so interesting to see the success of Andor,
Great show.
but it's also become like Star Wars for people who don't think they like Star Wars,
Mm-hmm.
right? And that is serving like a very specific fan, one that is almost entirely different from the Skeleton Crew fan.
Mm-hmm.
And so yeah, I think that is what it seems like is right now sort of at least the, I'd say like near future is there will be these two movies. The TV shows will sort of continue to sort of pop up and go away, and some will be renewed, some won't be. But the real question will be, after these two movies that have been announced, what do we see in terms of like Star Wars is built on trilogies? What do we see in that kind of like the big swing sort of era defining push, right? And that is yet to be determined.
Well, they've said they were going to do multiple trilogies, right? They've sort of been, you know, Benioff and Weiss were going to do one. Ryan Johnson was going to do one. I mean, it feels like everybody in Hollywood at one point was going to do a Star Wars trilogy. What's the latest on a new trilogy?
Short answer is I don't know. The one thing I love about putting this all in a book is just the contrast between the way Lucasfilm was able to operate and the way it has to operate now. And when George was running things, and I call him George not because I know him, but because everyone in Star Wars world calls him George,
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah.
But when he was running things, I mean, it really was in some ways like a big small business, because he was the lone voice, the lone creative voice often, and also financing his films. And so if a script wasn't ready, he could wait as long as he needed until
Mm-hmm.
it was ready, right? There was no um kind of release date that he had to back into or anything like that. And so it's so interesting because there's a kind of almost, I think, nostalgia when you look back on the company in those early days and how it was able to sort of drive its own destiny. And now, as part of a much bigger conglomerate that has an earnings schedule, has shareholders, has all kinds of things to maintain, it is in many ways the antithesis of what George built and what George wanted, which was autonomy, privacy, and to be able to control his own destiny.
What's the most surprising thing that you found in your research?
I think, I don't know if this is surprising, but I have found it sort of endlessly fascinating. The gauze of myth that has been wrapped around it for so many years. So for instance, like, there's this sort of sense that Star Wars came out of nowhere and no one saw it coming, and it was just this sort of like unbelievable phenomenon, and everyone thought it was going to fail. Everyone thought it was going to be a total disaster, and then it became the most successful movie of all time. And I think that's a very fun kind of narrative. It sort of feels like we get to root for the underdog. And there certainly was skepticism, and people who saw early cuts of the movie like laughed all the way home at how hokey it seemed. But there are also like reports within Fox in the months leading up to the release that like they could have a monster on their hands because there was so much enthusiasm, and the responses to the early screenings were so high. So what I find really interesting in teasing out is like what has sort of become legend and what was the historical reality, and like why do we turn some stories into legends? Like why do we like to do that? And Star Wars gets it quite a bit. And I think it sort of becomes this fascinating kind of dynamic where, for instance, like we all remember Jar Jar and the Jar Jar reaction. Well, the actor who played Jar Jar, Ahmed Best, has been cast in more recent Star Wars shows and embraced by the fans, who
Hmm.
are bringing their own kind of meta awareness of what happened to him to that viewing, right? And so like it's really a property unlike any other in its mix of what's on screen, what's happening off screen, and how fans kind of merge the two.
It's turning into WWE.
I mean, maybe actually, it's a comparison I would have never come to on my own, and I think it's absolutely right. It's absolutely right, yeah. And then if the wrong fans are mad about something, then there will be an overcorrection in other parts of the fandom to try and mitigate for that. Like there is like a light and a dark element to it, right? Where like everyone wants to make sure that Star Wars fandom writ large isn't painted with a broad brush or so on. So I find all of that like so fascinating. And the question that I'm always trying to tease out is like, how did it happen? Was it tapping something that we unconsciously needed, or is it business savvy? Is it a mix of both? Like, how did this happen? Like that was the sort of animating question that I started this book with, which is how did this become everything it is today?
Well, there's a couple of things you bring up that make me think about a couple of things. I mean, one is that, I don't remember offhand when Jaws came out, but Jaws is largely credited as the first big like blockbuster movie, right? And that couldn't have been many years before Star Wars. I mean,
It
it
was
would have
two.
been, it was 2 years before. So people at that time had never really seen, I mean, there weren't that many blockbusters to be able to look at that in a screening room and go, this is going to be a blockbuster, because there
Mm-hmm.
weren't really a lot of them, right? So it defined that whole thing. I mean, the Indiana Jones, Jurassic Park, all the Spielberg stuff and Zemeckis stuff, Back to the Future that came after that. I mean, all of those to a certain degree were in the mold of those types of scripts get greenlit because they're like, oh, this could kind of be like Star Wars. But there
Yeah.
wasn't one before that. And so then you look at film history before that and you say, okay, well, what are the parallels for this film? I mean, there really weren't a lot. It would have been the serials that Lucas was inspired by, right? And those were seen as kind of nostalgic and sort of, that's a reference that Douglas Fairbanks and all that kind of stuff, like those are references that no one gets now, but very large in the mind of Lucas when he made those films. And it also is like this weird kids movie that is inspired by Miyazaki, or not by Miyazaki, but
Kurosawa.
Kurosawa, right? Sorry. That's inspired by Kurosawa. And so like I'm sure a lot of people just didn't know what to make of it altogether.
Totally. And to your point, there was all of this kindling that had been laid before it came out, right? I think it is often seen as the originator of what you're describing, right? The kind of like the, let's call it like the blockbuster era. But there were things that had been sort of preset beforehand. So for instance, like merchandising had taken off in a way and had become a bigger and bigger part of major releases. Like I found an article, a truly surreal article from Time magazine in the early 70s about the making of the Great Gatsby film that Robert Evans was making with Robert Redford and Mia Farrow, and all of the tie-ins, kitchenware and men's clothes and things, all these tie-ins that they were, and it was and they interviewed some daughter or granddaughter of F. Scott Fitzgerald, and she was pissed off about it. So that had sort of already been sort of bubbling under the surface. And the other thing, to your point about like the Douglas Fairbanks of it all, is that like science fiction was really a genre that you had to like defend enjoying, right? It was seen as this like the worst thing you could call yourself was a sci-fi fan, because it was just a bunch of weirdos who scrutinized the literal science in a movie, right? Like and questioned the physics. And there's this great video, it's on YouTube, of Gary Kurtz and Charlie Lippincott, so a producer and a Fox marketing executive, with Mark Hamill at Comic-Con the summer before Star Wars comes out. And they're there promoting the movie, which also was brand new. No one went to Comic-Con with a movie that had not yet been released. And obviously now they go with movies that will never come out.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
They go like, I mean, way, way, way in advance. And at this panel, it's a truly surreal viewing experience, because they're asking all of these like really kind of bizarre questions that today we would consider quite politically incorrect. And then they are asking about like, well, how is sound traveling in space? Like, why are you like letting sound travel that way? That's not how it would. Like, they're fact checking it, right? They're fact checking the footage they've seen. And so that is another element that I think, as to your point, like no one would have necessarily thought like the big blockbuster will come from a genre that has basically become a bit of a laughingstock.
Yeah, they sort of mainstream the idea of space fantasy as opposed to science fiction.
Hmm.
And really what you had at the time were Isaac Asimov, Robert Heinlein type, I mean, that was science fiction.
Yep, exactly.
Yeah, very fascinating. So to pivot to another topic, AI, you just wrote a piece about AI focused mostly on Disney and their use of AI, but it was sort of a case study in how are these or how are these entertainment companies adapting to new technology really, and are they able to use it, or are they just putting out press releases? Talk about that article a little bit and what you found.
Yeah, it was a fascinating, I thought of it as kind of a company culture story, because I think it started with the understanding that of the studios, no one has more to gain or lose in AI than Disney, right? I mean, so many of this, like, what do most people say when they see these image generator tools, which is like, looks like Pixar. It looks like something that we would see
Mm-hmm.
come out of Disney, and to say nothing of Disney's long history of protecting its IP and protecting its characters. And so we started to hear some examples of AI being introduced or being discussed, especially on the studio side, and it really just becoming like getting mired in concerns, legal issues, potential guild issues, bad publicity. The example that it kind of started with was on the set of this new live action Moana that is coming out next year.
Mm-hmm.
There was a contract written up between Disney and Metaphysic to allow Disney to basically film scenes with Dwayne Johnson's character that would then sort of have a Dwayne Johnson deepfake applied to them. So Dwayne Johnson, obviously a pretty specific physique. He has a body double who is his cousin, who on all of his movies does his body double work. And this would have allowed them to basically put the body double in scenes and then put Dwayne Johnson's face atop him. And it took 18 months of off and on negotiating over who would own the data, how it would be secured, securing permissions from Johnson and everybody else involved. And ultimately, none of the footage and the tool will be in the final film because of, I'd say there are like a few buckets of concerns with these things. One is the ownership issue, and no Disney lawyer wants to be the one who gives away the store.
Mm-hmm.
And there is a concern because traditional VFX contracts hand over all ownership to the studio, but
Mm-hmm.
that does not transfer seamlessly when it's AI.
Mm-hmm.
And until that kind of legal precedent is established, studios are going to be very nervous about having a world where, 20 years from now, when you're renegotiating streaming rights, someone perks up and says, I own a piece of that movie, right? Or I own a piece of that character. I'm able to do what I want with it. And I also think there are still in the industry and with the broader public, publicity concerns and concerns
Mm-hmm.
around how audiences will react if they learn that they're watching a deepfake or they're watching
Mm-hmm.
something that was generated by AI. I talked to one one crew member who it wasn't on Moana. I mean, he's not a crew member with any particular film, but he works in visual effects and AI, and he was saying that he's told on some sets, like on day one, don't even use the term AI. Like, no one wants to hear it. The director doesn't want to hear it. The crew doesn't want to hear it. And he thought that was kind of like sticking your head in the sand. Like, he certainly didn't think
Hmm.
that was the rational thing to do. But there was an example that came up that I think kind of explains a lot, which is the original Little Mermaid, released in 1989. When that movie was being made, Disney hired Pixar, which was then
Hmm.
only a few years old, to do a few frames in a scene of their own, of the Pixar animation, but they kept it a secret because they worried that audiences would revolt if they learned that not every image had been hand drawn.
Hmm.
And it feels like we're in a similar moment now where there's this kind of some would say overheated concern around how audiences will react or if they'll feel duped, or if they'll feel like they're not getting what they were promised if they know AI was used in the making of the movie. And so the story was really about that dance, and Disney knowing it has to pay attention to what this technology can do,
Hmm.
while also having all of these guardrails and, frankly, all of this bureaucracy that makes it hard to do so.
Yeah, what struck me most was the Tron example. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Sure. So there's this new Tron movie coming out, and I have to say I'm not someone who's gonna like win any trivia contest when it comes to the Tron franchise, but there's a character in Tron called Bit that's like
Hmm.
a little robot, and they had an idea where Jeff Bridges would film scenes with this robot character named Bit, and Bit would be an AI model that has been fed a bunch of information on the character's dialogue, how the character would respond in various situations. And there would almost be, I've thought of it as almost kind of like improv, right? Where it's like the actor improvising with a character, but the character is basically it's like a chat GPT type response.
Hmm.
And obviously you can imagine it's Tron, it's a movie about the future. This is a kind of fun little in joke too, right? To have AI
Yeah.
used in the making of the movie about the future. But because of the publicity concerns, and the other thing looming over it was the potential issues with the guild or negotiations with the guild, and how actors and performers might respond, they scrapped that idea as well. And so
Wild.
it's been this kind of like it's been a real push and pull, and it's hard to find any example of Disney using AI that you would say was an unqualified success.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, it's wild because Bit in the original, I didn't catch this in your article. Bit in the original film was just like a ball that just animated, and it said like yes, no, like it was very, I mean, it was Bit because it was binary, right? In the answers that it gave. And so I don't know if they meant to personify Bit more than that, but that if that's all they were going to do with it and they still didn't want to do it, that really tells you how worried about it they are. But certainly the backlash is there. I mean, I see it every time I say anything positive about AI on LinkedIn, I get absolutely savaged by. I mean, there's a certain group of people that are just dedicated to hating it. Although I think part of that is the copyright infringement concerns. Today, Universal announced that they're going to sue anyone who trains on Universal films, which is good to hear because I don't think that we can let big tech get away with what they're trying to do right now, with the idea that they're going to basically ingest the world's content, train models on it, and then use it to compete against the people who created that content in the first place, though they didn't get their consent and they're not paying them anything, right? I mean, that's part of what's destroyed the journalism business that you're in.
Yeah.
If when when these social media sites can post summaries, and most people don't even need to click through the article or don't before they share it or whatever, and no money flows back to the people who did that reporting. It gets very hard to make to make a business off of the news, right? And so
It's the
the
comparison that came up all the time when people would talk about this like Mid-Journey lawsuit and things like that. Yeah.
yeah, and so I'm glad that, but it's no mistake that Disney and Universal are the two to be the most litigious here, because they're the only ones that aren't owned by big tech, right? I mean, this is the thing: is you don't hear about it from Paramount, who's aligned with the Ellisons. You don't hear about it from MGM. You don't hear about it from Netflix, even though they're not owned by big tech. They sort of are big tech. So I think that when Amazon obviously is bigger than even just MGM. So there are very few studios that are independent enough that are standing that will actually take on big tech in this. In the Trump administration, I think it was last week or the week before when they laid out their AI action plan.
Hmm.
Trump even made a point that, oh, we can't go, license all this stuff. It would be impossible. Well, Walter Kern, I don't know if him, but he's a
Big fan.
yeah,
Yeah.
I love Walter. Walter posted on Twitter, he said, "So you've created this amazing technology that's smarter than the entire human race, but the only thing that it can't do is account for where it learned everything." Okay.
He's so good. He's so good. He's so good. I mean, I think it's like, I mean, the Mid-Journey thing is fascinating because I think everybody wants there to be these like legal precedents set quickly, right? Because I think that's one of the frustrations is like no one knows really at this point where the guardrails are, and a suit like this I think is trying to kind of expedite that, but I don't think it's definitely not one.
No, I mean they're gonna let the courts weigh in on this, and I think what the courts are gonna have to decide is, do existing laws even address this topic, or is this a topic that? Because my contention would be that all the laws that we have were written to constrain humans. They were never written with the idea that you could have a machine that had the collect. I mean, when people tell me, well, if I can read a book and remember that book, then what's the difference? And it's like, well, the difference is that you don't have server farms all over the world with infinite storage connected to your brain, the combined intelligence of the entire human race. So yeah, I guess if you were Brainiac, you could do, but you're not, right? So
Hmm.
it's not, the analogy doesn't hold. It's a completely new thing, and you can't say with good faith that any law was created with this in mind. So it seems like the kind of thing that has to go back to Congress, but they're not going to want to do anything because it'll be Hollywood versus big tech. And anyone who ever created anything versus big tech. And so they'd love to stay out of it. So they're just going to let the courts weigh in on it. I think the courts have to decide, one, is this really analogous to human examples, and then is there a right to train? Can you? I think one of the things that's really under talked about in content creator circles is, we need to move away from this idea of, you bought my content, to you're getting a license to consume it in this form, right? Which is what
Hmm.
software has done forever. If you buy Microsoft Windows, that you didn't buy a copy of my Windows, you bought a
Right.
license to it under
Right.
certain
So you're
conditions.
imagining a world where if I buy a movie on Amazon to watch, I should start to view that as a license to watch it?
Well,
Is
it
that
already
the
is a
example?
license. It is a license.
Sure, 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 sure. But is that like the example you're
Yeah,
thinking
yeah,
of?
yeah,
Is
yeah,
that yeah,
exactly
yeah,
like
okay.
that. And just like that license, if you buy a movie on Amazon, what you're really buying is a license to watch it on Amazon. You're not buying a license to copy it, for example. You don't have that right. That right's not conveyed to you. So the question is whether there's a right to train as well. And I would, I think that there should be. You should have a consensual right to say, yes, you can train your model on my stuff, or no, you can't. And so, I think this will all go through courts, and then eventually it's going to have to, Congress is going to have to deal with it at some point. But I think they're going to want the courts. It's kind of this weird thing where they're not going to want to create clarity until the courts give them almost some guardrails as to how they're thinking about it. So everyone's like going to point. It's like that Spider-Man image where everybody's pointing at everyone else.
Yeah, no one wants to be. Yeah, no one wants to sort of to rule on it. What do you make of the argument that it's a national security concern not to allow free reign?
I think that it's absurd to say that it's a national security concern for us to beat China by adopting their stance on intellectual property. And I could wax along on this, but if you read your John Locke and your good capitalist philosophy, property ownership is the cornerstone to all wealth creation, right? If you don't own anything, you're not accumulate wealth. And in a lot of ways, kind of the free era of the internet has made us digital serfs, right? We don't own anything digitally. I mean, this is part of the reason I'm really into crypto is restoring this idea of ownership, and I think it's part of what has destroyed a lot of media businesses. Even though you've had this big explosion in distribution, the fact that you don't own anything anymore, it's hard for creators to. I mean, look at the value that you get for people like we were talking about social media and and article summaries, or what kind of, you get less than 50% on YouTube, or you get pennies on the dollar on Spotify. All the benefit of this explosion in technology has accrued to big tech, but the content itself that people are consuming, the value has not accrued there, right? Those industries have gotten hollowed out. And so I think that this thing, and hopefully with what we're trying to do in crypto, this is kind of last chance saloon for I think any kind of distributed digital economy. You can't have an economy where so much of the economic activity is digital, but it all accrues to a few players. That's just not, especially when the stuff that people are consuming is not really the tech, it's just delivered by the tech, right? So it'll be fascinating.
And doesn't it seem like the studios are just feverishly working to avoid a Napster moment?
I think there's going to be at some point. I mean, if you look at what's going on with some of the latest, and I track this AI stuff like very closely because I mean that's what I spend a lot of my time on, is messing around with AI. I mean, I think we're pretty close to somebody putting something out that is good. When you look at, there's a lot of slop, but when you look at what talented AI artists are able to do, I think we're going to be very close to some kind of, maybe not a Napster moment, but like the Sputnik moment of, oh shit. And I think that when you talk about people want these franchise films, but we can't count on China. And so we have to do them on tighter budgets, blah, 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 blah. Like the VFX is going to have to get cheaper, right? And the only way to automate it, to make it cheaper, is going to be AI. And the nature of the technology is changing too. Have you heard about Gaussian splats at all, about this?
No, I don't even know if you just said one word or five.
All VFX up until now have been based on geometry, right? It's 3D and it's triangles, right? So it can look like a live action thing, or it can look like an animated thing, but fundamentally it's the same technology. And these Gaussian splats are basically a completely different way of visualizing things in 3 dimensions. What AI is starting to do with this is it basically renders a 3D scene without any geometry, and it can render physics within it. Google just showed a demo of a thing called Genie 3 from their
Okay.
DeepMind group, and what it does, it actually does game-like environments, but they can look photoreal. So it can render things at the highest level of fidelity you can imagine, that are interactive environments that you can walk around in real time. That's technology they have in a lab right now. And
Wow.
so, yeah, and where to get that level of detail
Mm-hmm.
in the past, you would have to have some VFX artists go in and build each one of those. Now there's automation that they have, but you'd have to have somebody, build all those plants and build all that grass. And they can automate it, and they have brushes and they can do things. But this is, just telling the computer, give me a scene that has these things. It looks like this, and oh, I don't like that over there. Circle it. Can you, here, do, here's my instructions for how you should change it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And it does it, and it can do it at the highest fidelity in real time. There's no difference between kind of all these stages of work product, where you go from like gray box to
Right. Whenever you see like those clips and it's like VFX not completed, right? It's like these these kind of yeah, like very crude, right? It just you're saying
Yeah.
it just sort of skips all of that.
It can, yeah. I mean, there are like draft modes you can do that are like lower resolution, but in general, you're going to be able to jump to the final product much faster, and it's going to be from a prompt, and then you'll have artist tools that you can go in and get more surgical and change things. But I think it's going to be very hard to. I'm not an expert. I just play one. There are people far more expert than me, but the cadence is like every 6 months we get a major advancement in AI. We're about to get GPT-5, and I think, and Zuck came out the other day and
Mm.
was like, "Hey guys, I think I'm pretty close to AGI," you know. So he seems pretty confident. So I think, this next generation is going to be just even more of a step ahead. And I think we're probably 2 years from this stuff being, undeniable in terms of its usage. I mean, the other thing is just how fast you can build tools with it. I mean, I have a
Mhm.
friend who has built it's an AI tool workflow that you could basically make a little mini movie or make an animated short in. And you start with I'm going to create my characters. And so you say like these are my characters, and you can create a close up for them and like a far away. So you create that into kind of a still. And then you can type out like an outline of or you can type out sort of a like paragraph of this is my story. And then the AI will take it and break it into story beats and take like storytelling, formulations and flesh the story out for you. And then you can go in and edit the script. You can edit sort of those
Mhm.
beats, and
You
then
mean like
it'll
it
turn it into
knows
a
3 act
script.
structure, it knows like
It'll put in the
irony.
3 act structure, all that. Then it'll put it into a script. Then you can edit the script. Then you can go in and create storyboards, AI storyboards for each shot. And you can also say like start shot here, end shot there. That's the new thing that they've introduced. And then it'll render it all out. And so he's made this tool, this UGC tool, but he's been building it with AI as well. And the speed that they're going with is bananas. So,
So then
you know,
in a world where that becomes a tool that is producing high quality stuff, is that eventually integrated into an existing distribution system, or is it just sort of one sort of further breakdown where we have the equivalent of a that your friend has an equivalent of a Substack that is, if the cream rises to the top, producing good movies and TV shows that people will watch without having to go through some kind of corporate gatekeeper.
I think that it's going to be all of the above. I mean, I think that there are going to be UGC versions of it that look like YouTube and TikTok. And YouTube and TikTok probably will be where that content gets distributed. So, but there will be, the UGC kind of bottoms up approach, and there will also be, big studios integrating it into their workflows, and using it to replace tools they have now. And what I think is going to be the most interesting is there's a handful of AI kind of startup studios that have been formed, that professional movie makers trying to make studios with AI, and those are in an interesting position because they can build, kind of with no legacy. And I think that a lot of Hollywood studios will wind up having to throw a lot of stuff away that they've invested a lot of money in, just because it'll be so cheap and easy to build new.
Hmm.
But what's interesting about AI is that everything that you build with it is almost out of date by the time you started using it very much.
Oh my God, that's like some sort of weird Zen riddle. I mean, that is like so that's a crazy, crazy way to put it. And
like one of
so,
the things that like one of the things that was really hard to do like 6 months ago or whatever, right, was consistency, character consistency. Like if you had a character and you said I want to make a video and it runs and jumps and does this stuff, the character would not necessarily be consistent across all of those scenes. And so maintaining that consistency has been really hard. And now the models are getting better at it. So there were people who were building all this workflow around how they were doing using AI in order to maintain that consistency. The models come out and are better, and then all that's they have to throw that away. So it's
hmm, hmm,
creating this disposability of software where you can't, for the longest time, it's been engineer for the long term, and you still have to engineer for the ability to bring things in and out, right? With good engineering kind of architectural practice. But, but everything becomes outmoded so much faster. It's wild.
Man, that's fascinating. I'm so glad you walked me through that actually, because I liked your point about Sputnik, right? Like, where will there be a moment that we all remember as like the undeniability, right? As you said, because like everything so far is viewed with this kind of lens on what it might still yet become. You're saying like a Sputnik moment would be when we don't have that lens and we just know this is changing everything.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, when the game space, this is happening with like Roblox and Grow a Garden, where there's this game called Grow a Garden that he gets reported as being 16. He's not 16, he's 20 years old, but a 20-year-old guy, I think it was him and maybe a couple friends, made this game called Grow a Garden, which is basically you make a garden
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
in
it sounds sounds
Roblox.
sounds exactly what I was picturing. Yeah,
Pretty
yeah.
straightforward, right? And it becomes the most played game of all time in concurrent users. It had, millions of people concurrently playing it. More than Call of Duty, more than, I think it got up to more than all of Steam. Like, I mean, like huge player numbers. And that kind of is a Sputnik moment for people in the games industry who are paying attention, where it's like, hey, look, it's not the only one. There have been a couple other games like that, indie games that have blown up really big, that have been made by very small teams, and not by people who came from EA or, whatever. Like, people are starting in the professional games industry, they call it deprofessionalization. The kind of gray hairs like me in the games industry are freaking out because they're like, oh my gosh, like what these Gen Zs don't have in years of experience. Like, they can learn everything on YouTube, they can learn everything from ChatGPT. They're much better at social media promotion, and they're able to make these things, identify these needs that we're not thinking about as 50 something game industry professionals, and they don't need us to distribute them. Like, holy shit. I think we'll get there with, with movies. I mean, if you look at like Godzilla Minus Zero, like that
Mm-hmm.
was a kind of a holy shit moment for Hollywood, where I think it was $15 million the budget, but this
Yeah.
guy made one of the best, in my opinion, kind of like sci-fi-ish, monster movies of the last 10 years or whatever. Makes it for $15 million on his laptop at home when a production like that in Hollywood would have cost $150 million or something like that. So, and it also, I think, back to your point about international, sort of, sort of the complacency around, well, Hollywood will always be the place that these things come from. It's like, well, wait a second, if he's able to do this in Japan with $15 million, the whole world is going to be able to compete. And by the way, I mean, when you look at some of these markets like Vietnam, Southeast Asia, Africa, like there are young people who are very computer fluent, who are very tuned into internet culture, and it may come from one of those places, right? It's not necessarily going to come from the United States. But so I think you're going to see, I mean, I think it's only a matter of time, and the theaters are so desperate, that like if something came out that people wanted to see, like like Adam Aaron would have to give you the screens, right? They can't not give you the screens. I mean, they're having to try all types of things just to get people to come to theaters. So it's a very interesting time in that way. Well, we're coming up on time, so I just wanted to ask, sort of, any closing thoughts on the state of Hollywood, and sort of where we're at and with the culture.
Yeah, we covered a lot of it. The last point I would make is just sort of repeating a word you used, which was complacency, right? And it seems like the past several years have been sort of one example after the other of sort of shaking or trying to shake Hollywood out of that complacency, right? Whether it's international competition or the collapse of cable, or now everything that you've been describing when it comes to DIY AI models, right? I think that is what I feel the lapels are being shaken, but that is what I feel kind of the sort of like the core tension being, right? Is the sort of the ease and familiarity of complacency, and then the lapel shake one after the other of what has been happening. I'd say probably going back now about a decade.
Interesting. Well, Erich, thank you for your time. Tell the people where they can follow you and about your and where they can find out more about the upcoming book.
Yes, I appreciate that. This counts as a very, very early tour hit. I mean, the book is not even done. The book will be out at some point, but until then, I'm writing for the Wall Street Journal, and you can find me under my full name, Erich Schwartzel, in all the usual places.
Beautiful. Well, thank you, man. Thanks for the time. Thanks for tuning in to another episode of Plus One. Thanks, guys.